difficult thing to enliven this notion of penance and sacrifice. But I give it my best shot. So bear with me, and we'll see what we can do with it. But the Veritas leadership shows a really important topic at a really important time of the year. Penance and sacrifice go hand in hand with the season that we're in right now, the season of Lent. These 40 days preparing us for Easter are really supposed to be a season of kind of intense renewal, a time of conversion, a time to look at ourselves. You might ask yourself, well, in particular, we're preparing for these 40 days those who are being baptized into the Catholic faith at Easter. So at St. Thomas, Catholic churches across the world have catechumenics, men and women who are not yet baptized, who are preparing to receive the sacrament of baptism at Easter. And so this season of Lent is really an intense season for them to enter into penance and sacrifice. Because in baptism, they will be given a whole new life. But we're reminded in our Catholic tradition that there is certainly the baptism by water in the sacrament, but St. Ambrose says, which is conversion, but St. Ambrose says there's also an ongoing baptism of tears. And what he says there is that every baptized Christian has an unrelenting responsibility to continue to grow in Christ. It's not a matter of baptizing, boom, you're done. In baptism, something significant has happened. Your life is in Christ has been sealed. Your soul has been marked for Christ for all eternity. Any sin committed up to that point is forgiven. You're filled with grace. It is a defining moment. But that defining moment is only a moment to build a whole life of ongoing conversion. St. Ambrose says that we are unrelenting in a baptism of tears. And that baptism of tears is this: penance. It's this ability to be able to look at our life and to see the greatness that God has done even in the midst of the ugliness of our sin. I'm sure all of us would probably list the ugliness of our sin. And the list can be pretty long at times. But as we do that, we always look at our list of sins through the lens of Christ. To look at just our list of sins without the lens of Christ would lead us to despair, would lead us to sadness. Thank you for your active. So we look at that list of sin, and we look at it only through the lens of Christ, because what Christ has done for us is to take on the burden of sin. The penance that St. Ambrose speaks about is the tears of baptism. That every time we look at that list of sin through the lens of the mercy of Christ, we have a certain remorse, a certain sadness, that we have done this to Christ, that we have done this to others. And so, in some ways, even the baptized Christian, in fact, the one who's deeper and deeper into the spiritual life, they're the ones who are going to be practicing that very first act, that act of penance. That act of penance. Penance is a big term, it's got a lot of definitions, but for tonight, let me just focus on penance in this regard. Penance is to make amends for the damage which our sin has done in our relationship with Christ or our relationship with others. Okay? So penance is that regard. Like when you go to the sacrament of penance, right? Often the priest will say, your penance for these sins is to do this. And you're asked, after you leave the sacrament of confession, to do an act. Now, we know that in the sacrament of confession, Christ works. His grace is there. And in the sacrament of confession, sins are forgiven. Sins are washed away. They're forever forgotten. They're lost in the sea of mercy. That great story of Mother Angelica, she tells it, that she was on the seashore, on the mighty seashore, and she and her sisters were there a day on the beach. And after lunch, they had decided to kind of play in the waves that came in from that mighty sea. And they lifted up their hats took off their shoes, and in ankle-deep water, they'd run out and chase the waves as they went into the mighty sea. And as the waves come crashing into the mighty sea, they'd scurry backwards, and they'd run out and scurry, Can you imagine sisters doing this on the New Jersey shoreline? It had to be a spectacle. But she tells the story that she unexpectedly was kind of hit by a wave of water. And it kind of got her wet. And without any thought at all, she kind of shook herself dry, as she normally do. And she glanced down, there was a bead of water from the mighty sea on her hand. And like you or I, without any thought, she flicked that bead of water off her hand back into the mighty sea. And the Lord said to her at that moment, consciousness of her soul, the Lord said to her, retrieve that bead of water from the mighty sea. And she responded, Lord, it's impossible to retrieve that bead of water from this mighty sea. It's lost. He said to her, so too is your sin when you cast it in the sea of mercy, the sacrament of reconciliation. That's the power of God's mercy. So the power of God's mercy is that no matter what our sin is, no matter how long that list is, no matter how grave that sin is, no sin is beyond the power of mercy. And all sin, when confessed with a contrite heart and a firm resolution not to sin again, is lost forever in the sea of mercy. That's why whenever anyone walks out of confession, they are a new creation. They are no longer the same person who came in minutes ago, or a half hour ago, or an hour if necessary. That is a different person who leaves there. That person who leaves is graceful, they're forgiven, their sea completely lost. But yet, the priest still asks them to do a penance, right? Why are they asked to do a penance? They're asked to do a penance to amend for the sin that they've committed. The sin is forgiven, absolutely. But the consequence of sin lingers, right? The classic example of this is the person who uses alcohol on a Friday night. They just are stupid. They abuse alcohol, they abuse their body, they make poor judgments, and in that they just commit other sin. The next day they wake up and they recognize the ugliness of their sin, and they go immediately to the sacrament of confession, and they confess their sin, and they toss their sin in the sea of mercy, and all the sin of that crazy night is washed clean, and they are a new creation. But the reality is that the consequence of their sin lingers. Just as simple pain is a consequence of the sin that lingers. Okay? The broken relationship that they'll have to mend with their friend, that reality they have to face. Sin can be forgiven, but we in penance, we have to do to make up for the wrong of our sin. And this is what penance does for us. It's so that we do a penance, okay? That we do something to make right with the wrong. And as we grow in the spiritual life, the crazy thing is, there are great holy men and women who live what they call penitential lives. Every day they want to enter into life and living life in a penitential mode, offering penance for their past life, or offering penance for the lives of their loved ones who may have sinned and fallen in Christ and the church. So penance isn't just like, something that really bad sinners do. Penance actually is something that as we grow in holiness, as we grow in a desire for union with God, that we'll actually do more and more of. Acts of penance also will help to reestablish the correct habits that we need to be truly the people we're meant to be. See, the call to holiness, the call to live a perfect life as God is perfect, it's not a heavy burden, guys. It's really what you're called to. Each of us have a capacity within us to greatness. To greatness. And in that greatness, we have a sense of purposefulness. We understand who we are. We understand what God has in mind for us. But what does sin do? Sin tells us a lie about ourselves. And that lie then causes us to do things that aren't worthy of our dignity. And every time we step forward in sin, we lose a bit of the sense of self that we need to know who we are as God's children. So penance, in addition to making up the wrong, penance also helps to reestablish within us the habits to help reclaim the ground that is lost, the understanding of self through sin. Make sense? So we do a penance to regain some of the lost ground that sin doesn't allow. Penance then is something that we do all the time. Now during the season of Lent, we really focus on acts of penance. Let me ask you to do this. Turn to your neighbor. 2 or 3 of you together. 2. If penance is to make up for sin in our life, if penance is to regain the ground lost because of sin, each group come up with 2 examples of an act of penance. Let's start over with this group because we're just looking for examples of penance to make up for sin, also to regain ground lost in spiritual life because of sin. You answered the question, how does abstaining from salad dressing really inform? Salad is disgusting without dressing. But she makes the point. You know, I had a question. How does that do with penance? Did you hear the answer to that? Or did you answer? So,
it was like a whole self-control focus one day. But yeah, I just thought it should relate to
okay. Does the penance need reference to the sin? Well, maybe in this regard, perhaps it's a factor, but maybe the sin is just the person confesses sin. Well, like they're full, but yet they just continue to feed themselves because it's so good. So the penance offered might be a way to gain themselves and master what the person's after.
But if it's something
If it's only one, the game's good mastery. Other examples? Chris?
Prayer.
How does prayer say again?
It's a spiritual work of mercy.
Spiritual word of mercy. What's the content of your prayer to do it?
Well, you pray for the intentions of other people in life, or generally, you're trying to be like an intercessor for God and that person.
You kind of want to add that topic of prayer. You mentioned too that if you sin against somebody, to bring that person's spiritual needs to prayer. Other examples? Something you have to deliberately act forward to. Of course, it wouldn't be just for a while, right? It wouldn't be just for a while, like a while ends and then you meet again. Other examples?